Hello, everyone, and welcome to another amazing and exciting edition of Enterprise Chat here at MSME Africa. This is where we do all the talking about business and entrepreneurship. Yesterday, we were discussing as Nigeria Central Bank Governor Godwin Emefiele recently clarified that the withdrawal limit for the new Naira notes, as announced some days ago, will be made flexible and adjustable in line with the operational realities from January 2023. Emefiele was speaking in Daura, Katsina State while briefing journalists after a closed-door meeting with President Muhammadu Buhari. But today I have with me Yemi, the co-founder and CEO of Gradient Partners Limited, which is a startup real estate portfolio management. So joining me to discuss the new withdrawal limit, the CBN, what are your thoughts, basically?
So my thought is that, the cashless policy has pretty much come to stay. And it's been a long journey from 2012 up to now. The CBN enacted this cashless policy way back 10 years ago. And I think we've pretty much been on the same set of policies, and it hasn't been revised for about 10 years. I think it is important that, Nigeria joined the leagues of nations that are using digital to drive, what is going on in the economy, are using digital to drive transactions. I mean, those are my initial thoughts about, the cashless policy.
All right. Now, if you look at what the CBN governor said, he said one of the reasons for coming up with this policy is to, affect criminality, kidnapping, and considering that 2023 is an election year and a change of government for Nigeria, they're trying to cut down on vote buying and all of that. How do you see that?
Well, I'm not sure. I think people are making that conclusion. I'm not sure I heard the CBN governor say that. But I think there is a conclusion amongst, the observing public that the pronouncement is to deal with illicit flows. That would actually make it like a narrow scope. I think there is a broader reason why, the central bank would introduce something like the cashless policy. And I think the broader views is in line with, the mandate that the CBN has. One, for currency issuance, and then two, to ensure that there is an efficient payment system. So CBN is saddled with these two amongst its core banking mandates. And I think the reason why the CBN is going all out, to entrench this cashless policy is a reflection of its core mandates, really. I think it would be too narrow to think that the reason for introducing the cashless policy is just to, deal with illicit flows. It may deal with illicit flows in terms of maybe kidnapping and banditry, but I think that is not its primary focus.
Okay, so I mean, if you have to look at this policy really, do you see it achieving the desired result?
Well, I think it should, to a large extent. That there will be definitely challenges. So when we look at the unbanked, in Nigeria, so amongst the urban population, just about 70% of bankable adults in the urban population, are within the banking system. Now, 30% are not within the banking system, but when you go to the rural areas, it is just about 40%, of the adult population that are banked in the rural areas. So what it means is that when you implement the cashless policy, the people that are even banked in the rural population, even get further into, that unbanked territory. And then it gives a whole lot of challenges, for people within the informal economy. That is those who are operating their business and closing their transactions with exchange of cash with goods and services. So definitely there's going to be a challenge there, but will it on the long run achieve its objectives? Yes. On the short to medium term, there will be challenges, but I think the CBN along with the banks should be up to the task of resolving the issues that is going to be confronted, that would be confronted by individuals and businesses, and ensure that those issues, are resolved within a very short time. So that on the long run, the objectives, of ensuring that our economy is driven by digital closure of transactions, is met.
All right, now let's also look at the focus of our conversation for today. We want to really understand what are the benefits and the implications on entrepreneurs, somebody like you. What are the implications for entrepreneurs?
So the implication for entrepreneurs, would depend on the segments in which you are operating. Now, for top businesses, it means that one, a number of transactions that are being conducted with cash will now have to be digitized. It means that, for a number of your staff that would have to maybe go and make purchases outside, you need to get cards for them. And then they'll have to use cards and maybe other alternatives to sort out their transactions. Now, that's when people are able to use, electronic means of settling bills for businesses, even when, they are operating those transactions at the rudimentary level. It means that it gives you, as the CEO or as the chief operating officer or maybe the finance controller, a measure of control of what people are using, your sources of finance to conduct, as compared to, maybe cash. Cash is fungible. So I could obtain 50,000 naira cash from you and then spend it on something else and maybe obtain some kind of invoice or receipt. I think to a very large extent, it gives business managers some kind of control over how the monies from the business is being spent. And two, in terms of also when receiving, proceeds of sales. So there's a measure of control as well, because proceeds of sales are made straight, into the company's bank accounts, either through, the POS channels or through direct transfers. So there's a measure of control on both the turnover and the operating expenses, of the business organization. However, we come to a point where we understand that a number of challenges are being faced by businesses when it comes to closure of transactions through the electronic channels. So there are failures in those electronic channels. So whether you're using POS, we're still being plagued by, network issues. The infrastructure upon which the payment systems rest is still a big challenge. In the sense that, you have to obtain one or two POS or even more, across different banks for you to be able to get settlement. And even at some point in time, you will struggle sometimes to even get network across several banks. So that means in instances where people need to settle transactions in excess of, settle transactions with you, and they do not have that amount of cash in their possession, then that business kind of gets stalled. It's like, so what do you do when someone wants to pay for a transaction and the electronic channels, are unavailable, and then the person is unable to withdraw cash more than 20,000 naira in a day as an individual? So that becomes a kind of a challenge, and I think that will slow down, sales. And also beyond sales, it could also pose challenges for business owners in the um, um, I'm trying to think, when you move within the transportation sector, for instance, logistics.
Okay.
So when moving goods,
Logistics.
yeah, so when moving goods from one point to the other, so you realize that maybe somebody coming all the way from Abuja, as a driver, and is bringing some trucks of goods or maybe farm items to Lagos, would have to stop at one point, or the other. And in stopping, they need to fuel, they need to, buy some deliverables. And in the process, they're having challenges, in settling their bills. They cannot buy fuel because, the network is the network is not working. And in those instances, so you will find a situation whereby, in the absence of cash, a logistic manager or a driver moving goods from, Lokoja to Lagos, it will take him a bit longer. And maybe not even that long. Maybe it's not a delay alone. But what if that person is, bringing perishable goods, and is stuck somewhere, in the middle of the country, just because he couldn't get cash or couldn't use the electronic channel to settle his transactions. So those are the potential challenges, that entrepreneurs will face in the course of implementation of these policies.
All right. I mean, quite all right that you've noted some of these challenges, but I think the what's best is for everyone to look at the greater good in the long run, like you mentioned earlier. So, but I want you to give your final words to entrepreneurs or people who might be affected by this policy. What advice would you give to them at this point in time?
So my advice will be that, on the longer run, it looks very, very good. So when this cashless policy was introduced way back 10 years ago, there was a whole lot of hue and cry about it, about whether it was going to be successful or not. And I think we ran through with it, for the last 10 years. And I think many of us will say, you know what, it's a welcome idea. So for entrepreneurs who now are now being faced with much little cash available to them for the business, it will be important to devise some internal saying that businesses should institute policies around these cashless policies, to be able to kind of be seen to be responsive, to these cashless policies, than to just throw their hands up in the air and say, we don't know what to do. Now, if you are not innovative around this, then your customers will walk away to somebody who is a bit more innovative, around this. And I think another suggestion is that, for every problem, there is a solution and possibly a new business. Now, it is time for younger people, techpreneurs especially, to put on their thinking cap and find a solution to these cashless problems in Nigeria. If in Kenya you have M-Pesa as a solution, to cashless, then in Nigeria we can devise, a solution within the ecosystem in Nigeria, using both the telcos, the banking, the microfinance licenses. It is possible that we can create a solution that will be acceptable to people across Nigeria and would actually make it lasting, for us to deal in this economy without the use of cash.
All right, so with all that you have said, I think I would want to conclude that you agree that this cashless policy has and will do more good than harm to the economy.
I think ultimately it will do a whole lot of good to the economy, but then in the short run, we'll be plagued with the challenges of network issues, the challenges. So those challenges are there, but I think it is actually to leapfrog us forward and ensure that we devise solutions that makes the policy work for everyone.
Yes, I'd like you to briefly touch on how this policy can, do more good to the economy, because a number of people probably do not even understand, and they're wondering, oh, why is the CBN governor all out to stress everyone, or they feel like there's no basis for it. But in what ways do you think this policy is going to help the economy?
So on the when you look at cash, on its own, there's a cost to one producing the cash and then issuing the cash. The CBN prints this cash with money. So, and we've heard in some instances whereby the cost of even printing a particular denomination of the Naira notes is far more, than that denomination itself. So I think for the CBN, it will cut down the cost. And then there's a whole lot of cost in managing cash on its own, from carrying the cash from through bullion from one point to the other. I think those kind of costs stands to be eliminated. Now, in terms of also, businesses, as a whole, there's a limit to how you conduct businesses using cash at all times. So for me, I think, when the cash constraint is like this, it will spur people, techpreneurs, to come up with ingenious solutions that will be at reduced costs. And those ingenious solutions could probably bring up, much bigger businesses. So when we look at what goes on in other parts of the world, people settle transactions without necessarily bringing out cash. And I think Nigeria has come to that critical stage where, we can leverage on the whole lot of stuff going on within the ecosystem, right? Of telcos, banking, young innovators that are able to create card-based solutions and other electronic-based solutions to solve the problem. Now, the thing is, if there is no challenge, there won't be solution. So I think over time, we've gotten accustomed. Initially, I think way back 10 years ago, you could access almost any cash from your account, right? And then the CBN came up and said, oh, you can only access 500,000 naira per day as an individual. And then everyone says, at that particular point, I think a number of businesses migrated from, carrying cash to say, you can do transfer to my account. And then if we look back and dig even much closer to the last, let's say 2 years ago, when, COVID struck, we were all concerned about the possibility of contracting the virus by touching cash. And a number of businesses at that point in time, with this constraint that we are talking about, said, they will say, I will not touch your cash, please do transfer or use POS. So I think there's a whole lot of things going on. The banks can use all this star 000 hash, those innovations. Yeah, those unique codes have come. Many people have gotten accustomed to them. Transfers, people have gotten accustomed to transfer. But then, of course, I think the pushback from this is more to the charges that people will incur and the inconvenience, that people would also see in terms of, oh, I tried to do a transaction and it failed. And of course, we shouldn't, I think we shouldn't also ignore the fact that on the electronic channels, there's a potential issue with maybe fraud, from on people's accounts. So I think there are multiple concerns. But while we think that, yes, those multiple concerns need to be addressed, I think maybe 7 out of 10 times, these things will work. But then I also think that it is important that I think in the urban centers largely will be fine, but in the rural areas, there is a need for both the CBN and the banks to find a way to reach those in the rural areas to ensure that, they do not suffer unduly as a result of this policy. Now, I know the CBN and the bankers are saying that, you have about 1 billion is going to make it for them to have access to cash without those charges. It's something to think about, so that the people in the rural areas, the farmers, the small traders are not negatively impacted as a result of the cashless policy. And I think, in addition, the education of the public in terms of, the use of banking would actually also help. I mean, we've seen a situation whereby, whether legitimately or illegitimately, people have kept cash over the years and found out that the cash is rotten. So, and I mean, that also spells it out that, it is important that, people embrace banking. And so I think it is important that bankers and the CBN should educate the larger populace about the benefits of banking. And I think largely, we'll see people embrace this policy, especially when they see that, the CBN and the banks are responding to those issues that we have identified and resolving them, as we go along.
All right, I'll quite agree with you. And I would also want to add, with respect to some of the concerns that you have raised, I remember the CBN governor noted that in line with operational realities from next year, that the cash withdrawal limit is not going to be rigid. It's going to be flexible, and at some point in time, the CBN would have to review these policies. So hopefully, like I said, we should look at the greater good, and yes, pending the time, let's just work with what we have. Thank you so much for joining us on the conversation this morning. Yemi Soneye, co-founder and CEO of Gradient Partners Limited, which is a startup real estate portfolio management company in Lagos. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
All right, you're welcome. And this is where we wrap it up and say a very big thank you to you all for joining us on Enterprise Chat here at MSME Africa today. Don't forget, you can connect with us on our social media platform on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at MSME Africa. Thank you once again for joining us. I am Aranimi. Bye for now. See you next week.